Welcome, everyone. Just want to start the session, if you don't mind, because we obviously have two panels, and we want to make sure that we give as much time as we can for questioning, because I know there are lots of interesting questions that people want to delve into. So I'd like to introduce our three panel groups. We have Nunet Suviat, Government, Andrea Hoyt, Environmental Assessment Manager, and she's smiling, so I think I probably said it wrong. She's going to correct me. Department of Lands and Natural Resources, Makivik Corporation, Mark O'Connor, Resource Management Coordinator, Resource Development Department, and we have two on teleconference for ENVI Regional Corporation. We have Kate Darling, General Counsel, and ENVI Northwest Territories, and we have Jennifer Lamb, Resource Management Coordinator, Evuvalut, and you're going to correct me, Game Council, and both of those are on teleconference. So it's always a challenge for us to remember that there are those on the telephone. We tried to do it by video link, and it just wasn't, the quality wasn't good enough to be able to have a decent picture. So rather than having the disruption of that cutting in and out, we decided we would just go with teleconference. All right. So why don't we start off with the teleconference, if that's okay, because we always worried when technology may fail us, so we want to make sure we get their testimony in. And who would like to start? Can you please introduce, acknowledge yourselves when you're talking on the phone so that we know who's talking, please. We'll get used to who's talking once we recognize your voices, but if you could introduce yourselves before you speak, that would be great. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning. I think it's still morning there, yes. Good morning to the members of the committee and our fellow ENVI organizations who are there with you today. My name is Kate Darling, and as you mentioned, I am General Counsel for the ENVI Regional Corporation, and I'm joined by my colleague, Jen Lamb, for the ENVI Game Council. IRC and IGC represent the rights of ENVI under the ENVI final agreement, so we are here speaking today in representation of those rights. Can everybody hear me on the phone? I should test that first.
You're fine. We had a little challenge with the volume, but I think if everybody puts their earpiece on, we should be able to hear you. Yeah. Okay. Are you on? Kate is speaking, and if you all have your earpiece on, you can hear it. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, please. Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. We do apologize for joining you only by phone this morning, and we recognize that it's very difficult to communicate complex ideas over the telephone. We did work with your logistics team to try for a video conference, but our upload speed is too slow here in Inuvik still. As you probably have heard from other participants in the past in your committee work, connectivity is a constant frustration for us here in the north. And our disembodied voices are but one demonstration of how many of our Arctic communities are both geographically and technologically a fair ways from the capital. Nevertheless, thank you for giving us the opportunity to present the perspectives of IRC and the Game Council on Bill C-69 today. I'd like to start by providing a brief bit of context for our comments. Jen will then lead you through the key issues that ENVI wants to see addressed through this legislation. And then you'll hear from me briefly again at the end. I should say that we both feel that this bill is an opportunity, and the review process was a thorough one that brought together many ideas that we hope will see the light of day in the legislation that is ultimately passed. So for context, the Nunavut Settlement Region is located in the western Arctic segment of Inuit Nunavut, or Inuit homeland, which includes the lands, ice, and waters of the Mackenzie Delta, the Beaufort Sea, and the Arctic Ocean. Nunavut initiated land claim negotiations with the Government of Canada in the early 70s, and the Nunavut final agreement was given effect June 25th, 1984. It is a modern land claim agreement within the meaning of Section 35(3) of the Constitution Act 1982. The massive effort of connecting remote communities and settling a land claim came in response to increasing and relatively unfettered development activity in the Inuvialuit settlement region. And at the time, the permissive federal policies that supported this kind of activity in frontier lands. The agreement that resulted, as IRC Chair and CEO Dwayne Ngexik-Smith regularly reminds us, belongs not just to Inuvialuit, but also to Canada.
Hang on a minute, please.
Each party carries a...
Okay, hold on a minute, please, just a second. Go ahead,
Madame
Monsieur
la
Godin.
Présidente, l'interprète.
Madam Chair, the interpreter is having great difficulty understanding the witness and hearing the witness to interpret. For me, I don't know how we can improve the quality of the sound for the communication, but I know they're doing everything they can to interpret for me, but there is a great problem with the technical aspect, and I'm the only parliamentarian here recording it.
If we slow the it down a bit, it means it'll go a little bit longer, but I think we can accommodate that. So can I just? They can't. I can't. So I'm hoping if we slow it down a bit, that will give the interpreters a chance to keep it. Can we just give it a try at a slower pace and see if that might work better? And you can let us know very quickly whether that's helping or not. Okay?
For me, I don't have a problem, but I invite you ask
to listen
for
to the French
translator what the solution for the best translate.
I can't communicate with him, so I'll suspend and see what we can do with the translation. So can you find out what we can do? So they really should be able to follow along with what you're saying. So I'm not sure what the problem is. And we'll start again. We'll go a bit slower. Joel, do we need to start over? Which I'm fine to do. But going forward, let's slow it down and see if our translators can try to keep up. Okay? Please, Ms. Darling, if you could carry on, that would be helpful. Okay? Thank you. Oh, resume.
And thank you for the patience of those in the room. So, in a nutshell, what I'd like to convey with the context is that the Inuvialuit final agreement was negotiated in response to the very things that Part 1 of Bill C-69 seeks to address. And while it was negotiated 34 some odd years ago, it remains relevant to the same forces that are at work today. The ISA, or Inuvialuit Final Agreement, is structured on principles of sustainability. The stated objectives of the ISA are to preserve Inuvialuit cultural identity and values in a changing northern society, to enable Inuvialuit to be equal and meaningful participants in the northern and national economy and society, and to protect and preserve the Arctic wildlife, environment, and biological productivity. In other words, the very same purposes outlined in Part 1, subsection 6A and B of Bill C-69 are those that were incorporated in the final agreement in 1984. To achieve these goals and recognizing the development to which Inuvialuit needed to respond at the time, the IFA established in Section 11 an impact assessment system that is triggered at a low threshold, and as Jen will explain now, it has worked.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to present. Thank you to the committee members. My name is Jen Lam, as Kate mentioned, and I will be making remarks on behalf of the Inuvialuit Game Council. As Kate mentioned, the IFA sets out a robust and inclusive impact assessment process, which has proven to be effective since it was enacted in 1984. The IFA's Environmental Impact Screening Committee, and Environmental Impact Review Board processes support the purposes and objectives outlined in the proposed act. Canada's interests have been and will continue to be fully represented through membership and appointment of chairs of these boards, as well as through the authority of the relevant government body to approve and reject a proposal. The ENVI Game Council feels that the existing IFA processes have established a comprehensive and robust environmental impact assessment framework that represents both Canada's and Inuvialuit's interest. The IFA processes also have the confidence of the Inuvialuit to appropriately consider and incorporate their views into the assessment. Under SIA 2012, unnecessary complications and duplication of processes were put into place. The Inuvialuit Game Council have, on a number of occasions, voiced their concerns to the government at the time. The Council hopes that this review would address the issues of duplication and provide clarity and recognize the processes established under the IFA as the appropriate processes for assessing effects of proposed development in the Inuvialuit settlement region. I'll bring it back to Kate.
Thank you, Jen. So what we're trying to convey here today is that parallel impact assessment systems, both of which involve federal representatives, are a recipe for confusion, delay, and expense. They violate the one project, one review principle that has been accepted by Canada. More fundamentally, though, the imposition of a second system inevitably undermines the screening and review process that Canada and Inuvialuit promised to uphold at the beginning. This is because when you have duplicate systems and they are working their way through the process, there's a potential for differing outcomes, differing recommendations, differing timelines, and if a recommendation is coming from a land claim-based process and alternatively from an agency-based process, then the ultimate decision maker has to decide which one to accept. If both systems are undertaken. Likewise, our feeling is that the proposed substitution option under Section 31 of the proposed Act, which leaves substitution to the discretion of the minister on a case-by-case basis, introduces uncertainty and likely delays for the proponents and for the stakeholders and for the regulators, as the substituted process may take time to commence. So looking at the issue holistically, having competing processes is not conducive to effective review or responsible development. However, we see that Section 4 of the proposed Act may offer a solution for us. And I will allow, of course, my fellow Inuit organization colleagues to speak to their views and their specific situations with respect to the provisions of the Act. But for Inuvialuit, Section 4 may hold a clue. However, in its current form, this section, for the ease of the group, refers to the non-application of the Act, which is something that both IRC and the Game Council have been advocating for some time. Currently, the provision states this Act does not apply in respect of physical activities to be carried out wholly within the land described in Schedule 2. What we would recommend is some additional text that specifically identifies the non-application of the Act to jurisdictions as defined in the proposed Act, where a designated project is subject to a process established by a land claims agreement for assessing impact of that project. In a nutshell, that's what ENVI have been advocating for. It's relatively simple, and we would leave it there and open it up for questions now or at the end.
Thank you very much. What we're going to do is we'll hear from all the witnesses and then we'll open it up to questions. And for those that are in the room, I have some helpful tools. When you're about a minute left, I'll put up the yellow card, just gives you a sense of where you're at. When I put up the red card, it means you're out of time. Just wrap up your thoughts as quickly as you can, please. Thank you. So who would like to go next? Ms. Hoyt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for inviting us here today to discuss Bill C-69. I would like to start by recognizing that we are on the traditional territory of the Algonquin, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe peoples. My name is Andrea Hoyt. I'm the Environmental Assessment Manager with Nunatsiavut Government and work out of our Makkovik office. How's that for speed?
That's good. No, good pace.
The Nunatsiavut Government is the regional Inuit government established through the Labrador Inuit Land Claims Agreement. Nunatsiavut Government is currently in the midst of a general election, and that is why our minister cannot appear before you today and has sent me in his place. Nunatsiavut Government has jurisdiction in relation to the environmental assessment of projects on Inuit-owned land in northern Labrador, and a role to play in environmental assessment of projects in the Labrador Inuit settlement area outside Labrador Inuit lands, as well as projects that occur outside our settlement area that have impacts on our rights and territory. We have participated in the processes and procedures leading up to the introduction of Bill C-69, including providing comments on the Government of Canada's discussion paper in response to the final report of the expert panel on the review of environmental assessment processes. Nunatsiavut Government's understanding of Bill C-69 leads us to believe that we have not been heard, or that the Government of Canada has not accommodated our concerns. I'm here today because the Inuit of Nunatsiavut believe that you will hear them and amend this bill in order to do what is right. Our greatest concerns, and those on which we focused our written submission, include the necessity to provide for free, prior and informed consent of Indigenous peoples for projects that affect them, mechanisms for harmonization to achieve the goal of one project, one assessment, sustainability and how that ties to the public interest, and the way that the legislated planning phase is articulated or not in the Act. Nunatsiavut Government wants to be clear about the importance of Indigenous consent at critical decision points in the impact assessment process under the bill. Perhaps the best way to explain the importance of consent is as follows. It is an offense under Section 144 to contravene Section 7 of the Impact Assessment Act, which prohibits a proponent from doing anything that might impact the physical or cultural heritage of the Indigenous peoples of Canada or cause a change to the health, social, or economic conditions of the Indigenous peoples of Canada. Under subsection 7.3, the proponent can do things that impact the physical or cultural heritage of the Indigenous peoples of Canada or cause change to the health, social, or economic conditions of the Indigenous peoples of Canada under authorization of the agency or under Section 16.1 or a ministerial statement under Section 65. As the Indigenous peoples do not participate in a decision, referred to in 16.1 or leading to a ministerial statement, a proponent can impact their physical or cultural heritage or their health, social, or economic conditions without their consent and without committing an offense. It is difficult to understand how the federal government finds this acceptable. To be blunt about it, this bill continues the practice of using the power of laws to license the slow and steady genocide of Canada's Indigenous peoples in the name of the public interest. We're asking you to stop that here and now in this bill. The provisions in the bill to harmonize impact assessment processes are deficient. There are limited options in the toolbox, and cooperation seems to be limited to reacting to proposed projects rather than taking a proactive approach. The principle of one project, one assessment should be clearly articulated as a guiding principle for intergovernmental cooperation. It must be addressed at two general levels. First, the establishment through intergovernmental agreements of cooperative frameworks that, independent of any project, harmonize assessment with a view to minimizing, if not avoiding, process overlaps, duplication, and multiple assessments. And second, in a project-specific context, interjurisdictional arrangements to cooperate in a project assessment, usually currently framed as an intergovernmental agreement establishing a joint review panel. The Impact Assessment Act does not address the first level, and that's a fundamental failure. And the second is inadequately addressed, largely through the offers to cooperate with other jurisdictions, which are made by the agency during the planning phase. A tick-in-the-box offer can effectively download the responsibility to others. Substitution appears to be considered the apex of cooperation in the Act, but the Impact Assessment Act does not provide a coherent and transparent process for its accomplishment, and nor are there provisions for securing Indigenous consent on the substitution of an impact assessment process affecting their Indigenous rights. Canada has repeatedly stated its commitment to sustainability, including in the preamble to the proposed Impact Assessment Act. The Nunavut government agrees that sustainability has to be a core principle of good impact assessment decisions, but of equal importance, Indigenous peoples have to be recognized as integral to sustainability. Parliament has an obligation to ensure that Indigenous peoples and Indigenous communities are sustainable. Our rights and cultures are not to be sacrificed to sustain others. The sustainability question must require that decision makers identify how a project will promote the environmental, health, social, cultural, and economic sustainability of affected Indigenous peoples. The definition of sustainability in Bill C-69 is insufficient, and we've proposed other language in our written submission. The decision at the end of an impact assessment process must truly acknowledge trade-offs and justify decisions. The concept of sustainability includes Indigenous peoples, and decision makers must account explicitly for the substantive effect of authorizations on Indigenous peoples and their rights and their future generations. Decision makers must be required to justify any trade-offs between factors deemed to be in the public interest and impacts on Indigenous people or their rights. Recent experience, particularly with respect to the Muskrat Falls project, is that political decision-making occurs in a black box, and the result is decisions that sacrifice our rights and interests accompanied by a bare assurance that Indigenous rights and interests were considered. Assurances are unacceptable. Decisions under the Act should explain how the Minister accounted for all the Section 63 factors, including explicitly for any substantive effects that the determination may have in relation to an affected Indigenous group. The Minister must be required to explain any trade-offs between impacts that the designated project may have on an Indigenous group or their rights. The Minister must also be required to specify which monitoring measures and aspects of follow-up programs must be designed so as to prevent or mitigate impacts that the designated project may have on an Indigenous group or on Indigenous rights. In regards to the planning phase, the expert panel's report, Building Common Ground, had a well-articulated planning phase, which was designed to build consensus, including consent of Indigenous peoples, on how the impact assessment would be undertaken. This planning phase was to bring people together early in project planning to share knowledge and agree on what does and does not require future detailed assessment in the impact study. The planning phase was seen as providing an opportunity for Indigenous groups and other governments with impact assessment responsibilities to agree on a specific process adapted to the particular project with its potential impacts, while also accounting for the various assessment regimes that would apply. The planning phase in Bill C-69, the Impact Assessment Act, sections 10 to 15, falls far short of this vision. There are no details on the process, products, or parties. There's no requirement to develop an impact assessment plan, a conduct of assessment agreement, a public participation plan, or tailored impact assessment guidelines. In fact, there are no clear deliverables from this process, and there's no requirement to seek agreement of affected Indigenous peoples. Nunavut government has been involved in the legislative and regulatory reviews for Canada's environmental legislation over almost 2 years. Our messages have been very consistent. This is not a time to tweak legislation that doesn't work, but an opportunity to create something that truly works towards reconciliation while helping Canada move towards an economy which meets the needs of the current generation without compromising future generations' ability to meet their own needs. The legislation must integrate free, prior, and informed consent in order to work towards reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous peoples. The legislation must allow treaties and land claim agreements to be respected and fully implemented. Indigenous peoples have a tradition of sustainable, respectful development and use of the land and resources in their traditional territories. In order for the federal government to fully partner with Indigenous peoples, there must be a shift from mitigating the worst negative impacts towards using impact assessment as a planning tool for true sustainability. We've made several specific recommendations in our written submission, proposing amendments that we think will strengthen the Act and improve impact assessment in Canada. Thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have, either about what I just said today or what we put in our written submission.
Thank you very much for that, and we'll hear from Mr. O'Connor, and then we'll go to questions. Thanks.
Okay. Madam Chair, honorable members, I thank you for the opportunity to be here today and hope that my input will be useful for your deliberations. I'm here representing the Makivik Corporation with regards to Bill C-69, in particular with regards to the Impact Assessment Act included therein. Makivik Corporation is the birthright organization established in 1975 to represent Nunavik Inuit ethnic rights pursuant to the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. It was the first modern land claim agreement in Canada. Makivik in Inuktitut means to rise up, which was a very fitting name for the organization mandated to protect Nunavik Inuit rights, interests, and financial compensation that was provided by the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. More recently, Makivik also signed the Nunavik Inuit Land Claims Agreement, which has been in effect since 2008. Through this agreement, Makivik, on behalf of Nunavik Inuit, the residents of Nunavik, owns 80% of all of the islands, including both the surface and subsurface rights in the Nunavik Marine Region, the region defined under the Land Claims Agreement. Because of habit, I will clarify now that the JBNQA is the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, and NILCA is the Nunavik Inuit Land Claims Agreement, and I usually use the acronym so there's a chance they'll slip out. I'm a resource management coordinator for Makivik in the Resource Development Department, and I've been entrusted by the Inuit of Nunavik to speak here on their behalf, and when it comes to environmental issues and their potential impacts on Inuit rights. I'm not here today to provide an in-depth review of the proposed legislation or its potential impacts on Nunavik Inuit, but instead will speak to you about the core concepts about which our understanding of the impact assessment process are based. Nunavik Inuit are not opposed to development. They recognize that large-scale development projects can represent significant economic potential for our region and our communities. However, we also recognize that even the smallest projects can have significant impacts on the environment and on the Inuit way of life. This is especially true when we consider the fact that Nunavik is one of the most pristine areas in Canada, and that wildlife harvesting is still a major component of food security. Because of this, there's an expectation within our communities that development projects will not be allowed to proceed unless every precaution has been taken to ensure that they are compatible with our understanding and respect for the environment, and that they uphold the maintenance of Inuit livelihoods, traditional practices, and the cultural identity. As you know, I represent a region where governments have historically taken a top-down, colonialist approach to determining what is in the public interest. Of course, I'm referring to events such as the High Arctic relocation, residential schools, and the dog slaughter, all of which were seen by governments at the time as being a benefit to Inuit. It's safe to say that Nunavik Inuit do not generally trust Southerners and governments to determine what is in their best interest. The assurance that impact assessments will be conducted by people who are familiar with the region the people, their culture, and their day-to-day reality is therefore critical. For this reason, the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement and the NILCA have laid a framework for environmental, social, and impact assessments to be conducted by bodies whose members give Inuit a direct role in the assessments. These bodies are essentially tasked with applying federal laws of general application in a manner that is consistent with the particularities of our region and in a culturally appropriate way. It's critical that the provisions and spirits of these agreements be upheld by any federal legislation that's put in place by the government, including Bill C-68 and 69. Last week, you heard a similar message from Mr. Bill Namagoose, who was here representing the Crees of Iuishi. He provided you with a relatively detailed overview of the federal social environmental assessment regime that was included in Section 22 of the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. Mr. Namagoose correctly explained that under this regime, the COFEX should be the sole body responsible for federal assessments on the Cree territory of the JBNQA. I assume that you're already familiar with the JBNQA, but I will nonetheless take the opportunity to remind you that Section 23 of the agreement is actually essentially a carbon copy of the regime that Mr. Namagoose presented to you. The main difference being that the body responsible for assessments is called the COFEX North and applies to the Inuit territory. The COFEX North's membership is composed of representatives who are appointed by the Inuit and by the federal government. Similarly, under the Nunavik Inuit Land Claims Agreement, the Nunavik Marine Region Planning Commission and the Nunavik Marine Region Impact Review Board were created to oversee the impact assessment process in the offshore region. For each of these bodies, half of the members are appointed based on nominations put forward by Nunavik Inuit, by Makivik Corporation, and the other half are appointed by governments. In either case, the impact assessment regimes that are included within our land claims agreements are the outcome of extensive and careful negotiations. They are sensitive to the particular circumstances of the region, have been constructed with the rights of Nunavik Inuit in mind, and perhaps more importantly, they are relevant to and trusted by Nunavik Inuit. There is no need to add another layer of federal assessment to them. The written submission that we provided you outlines a number of inconsistencies between the text of Bill C-69 and the provisions of our land claims agreement. These relate to matters such as the project screening phase, the impact assessment agency's role in impact assessment, legislated timelines, etc. A relatively straightforward example of that is the fact that project screening, under the JBNQA, a project screening committee was established to determine whether or not projects that are not automatically subject to or excluded from review within the proposed act, this would fall upon the agency to do. So there's some inconsistencies, and you'll understand that we can't support the creation of federal law and legislation that conflicts with the provisions of our constitutionally protected rights and processes. Although we acknowledge that the proposed Impact Assessment Act includes provisions that allow for substitution or harmonization, we are concerned that they won't be implemented to their full potential, leaving us with an extra layer of federal impact assessment. Mr. Namagoose proposed last week that the new legislation allow for a carve-out of the JBNQA's Section 22 process as it applies to the Cree territory. I will repeat his request today and ask that the process for federal environmental and social impact assessment that was described in Section 23 of the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement and the process defined in Sections 6 and 7 of the NILCA be recognized explicitly in the Act. Failing that, it's critical that negotiations to establish the appropriate regulations or agreements be initiated such that the direct participation of Nunavik Inuit in all impact assessment decisions is retained. I won't venture too far into the debate about consent at this stage. I recognize that it's an issue that was debated at length here, in other forums, and in our written submission to this committee. However, I will note that we are troubled by the fact that the proposed legislation does not require the minister or the agency, as the case may be, to obtain the consent of Indigenous groups before authorizing works to proceed. We certainly agree with the proposed early engagement phase will be beneficial towards obtaining the consent, but as Andrea outlined, we are worried that the Act will allow for unilateral decisions by the Minister that can affect the constitutionally protected rights of Indigenous peoples without needing to obtain their consent. Lastly, I wish to draw your attention to another organization that was born out of the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, the Kativik Environmental Advisory Committee. The committee is composed of equal representation from the Inuit, the Quebec government, and the Government of Canada. Within the Act, the advisory committee is defined as a consultative body to responsible governments and is the preferential and official forum for responsible governments concerning their involvement in the formulation of laws and regulations related to the environmental and social protection regime. It's mandated to oversee the administration and management of the regime through the free exchange of respective views, concerns, and information. While Makivik Corporation has been actively engaged in this file for some time now, it appears that the Kativik Environmental Advisory Committee has been greatly underutilized by the Government of Canada throughout this process. I must therefore stress the importance that you take the necessary steps to engage with them before the new legislation is adopted. They've been involved in the implementation of the JBNQA impact assessment regime for over 40 years and have tremendous insights to offer. More importantly, though, their participation is required through the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yeah?
Before we proceed to questions, I'm concerned. We don't have the briefs yet for any of these witnesses. And I would like, first of all, the answer to imagine they're going through translation.
Yep.
It's going to be very difficult for us to submit any necessary amendments based on what they're asking for if we can't have those well in advance, because then we have to go through the drafters and then it has to be translated and then submitted. So I'm wondering if we can have some kind of idea when we're going to have these briefs. And if it's not like by tomorrow, I think we need to extend the deadline to submit amendments.
Okay, so I know that they are working diligently to get them to us as fast as possible, and you are seeing them coming through. My understanding is that their expectation is that they should be to us before the end of the week or by the end of the week.
By the end of the week is not adequate, and so I am asking that the deadline for submission of the amendments be extended, because I want to give due consideration to the recommendations, and I don't feel that I can until I actually see what's proposed in the briefs.
Okay, we are having quite a few witnesses in front of us, so we're getting it firsthand to be able to hear and speak with them directly, and the brief will be following up. I'm asking for a bit of an update here on when we can get them, and I'll work that with the clerk. Okay.
That's not the answer to my question. I'm asking that the deadline for submission of amendments be extended to a later date.
Okay, we have agreed on a process on dates and how we're going to be, because the most important part is obviously hearing from everybody, getting those briefs, and my understanding is you will get those briefs before the deadline. We'll have the weekend, Monday, till 4 o'clock, I think, is when we have to get them in, so there will be some time. But let me continue to discuss this with the clerk and get the dates so I can inform the committee better about when you're going to have all the briefs in front of us. Okay? And then we can talk about that. All right? So first questioner is Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for being here today. Thank you to the folks on the phone for being here and being so patient. I'm going to go first to Ms. Darling and Ms. Lamb. And thank you again for being here. By incorporating, and I wasn't certain exactly who was speaking when you were speaking, so feel free to answer whoever feels like answering this. But by incorporating Indigenous knowledge into the process with C69, what do you think? Do you feel that that's going to create a better relationship between government, the proponents, and Indigenous groups?
So this is, thank you for the question, Mr. Fisher. This is Jen Lamb speaking. So it has already been shown in the past reviews that have been done in this area that the inclusion of Inuit knowledge in the process has created a great amount of buy-in in the process itself. Our past review processes have included a lot of input from the communities. The screening committee and the Environmental Impact Review Board themselves, along with the government members, of course, also have ENVI outlet members. Those offices themselves also have a fairly close communication link to our community's hunters and trappers committees. So there's already a very strong relationship with the ENVI outlet people, and the ENVI outlet people trust this process.
Excellent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would add to that just from a perspective of mutuality, which reconciliation requires, it's essential for a decision maker to not only ensure that stakeholders understand what's at stake, but also that the decision maker understands the perspective and the views of those that may be adversely impacted, and specifically rights holders. And if there isn't an appropriate venue for sharing that understanding, in other words, unless there's a mechanism for knowledge flowing in both directions, the process is invariably incomplete.
I had the opportunity to sit around a table with some Nova Scotia chiefs on the weekend, and a round table, and it wasn't about this bill, but they did lament the historic issue with interdepartmental coordination. Now, do you think C69 will, the things that are in C69 will improve interdepartmental coordination, that whole of government consultation with Indigenous groups?
I think that remains to be seen to a certain extent. Sorry, was that question directed to
either Jennifer or Kate?
Okay, thank you. I'll take it first. Some of it remains to be seen in the implementation of the resulting act. Certainly, funneling consultation efforts through an agency that has an obligation to perform those functions would be of assistance, and the provisions relating to or obliging departments to provide their expertise to the project or to the review process will be of assistance. But what we don't see in the consultation provisions is a very clear standard that the consultation has to meet. So while the agency must offer to consult, there isn't an express obligation to complete consultation of any kind of quality. And so while I think, so to your question, I think there are provisions that do support better interdepartmental coordination. It will remain, I think, to the managers within departments to give their staff the authority and the resources in order to do it. But at the end of the day, the quality of the consultation has to be something that can be evaluated, and mindful of the recent jurisprudence out of the Supreme Court of Canada.
Jennifer, and you said in 2012, the 2012 legislation provided some unnecessary complications, and that you voiced your concerns at the time. Does C69 solve any of those unnecessary complications that were in the 2012 legislation?
Can I just ask if Jennifer and Kate, can you just back off your mic a bit? It might be that is part of what's overloading the, just come back from the mic a bit and see if that helps us on our side hear you better.
So I think under the new proposed act, there is some language that provides some clarity. However, I don't think it is strong enough to be able to provide the certainty that the ENVI are requesting.
Do I have any more time, Madam Chair?
A minute.
Okay, so Ms. Hoyt, you said something I thought was really interesting. You said that Bill C-69 seems like it's reacting to projects rather than being proactive. I hadn't really thought about that. Can you maybe just finish off the time on that topic? Is it possible to be proactive when we're dealing with a project that comes forward by a proponent?
You've got 30 seconds.
Oh.
Well, I think there are a couple of problems around the projects with Bill C-69, and one of the problems is that we don't know what projects we're talking about. So there's a project list that we don't know what it covers. And they're not clear stopgaps to let us know what we're even going to be assessing, what a designated project is, and for things that are not designated project, what level of screening or consideration by the federal government there will be. So that's a problem. I think you another time.
Yep, sorry, that's, I'm sure we'll explore that a little further. So for Kate and Jennifer, I think that was helpful, backing you off from the mic a little bit, doesn't overwhelm the censor, so I think it sounded a lot better. So thank you for that. And next up is Mr. Fast.
Well, thank you very much to all of our witnesses for appearing here today. And my question is actually to all of you, because all of you actually referenced the right to substitute that's articulated in Section 31 of the Act. You have already noted that it's actually the minister's discretion on whether a substitution will be permitted. A number of your organizations have already got agreements in place that have been there for quite a number of years. You've been operating under those. Now there's another process that you're being expected to accommodate somehow. I believe it was either Ms. Darling or Ms. Lamb that referred to parallel systems. You've got the Nunavut final agreement in place. Now you've got Bill C-69 also running parallel to that process. I believe one of you articulated that you're concerned that this was a discretionary power on the part of the minister whether to allow the local process to substitute for the impact assessment process set out in Bill C-69. First question to all of you is, in your consultations with the government leading up to Bill C-69, did you apprise them of this concern? And did they acknowledge that this was an issue that needed to be dealt with? Secondly, if you could more broadly comment on how this parallel system is still going to challenge your ability to have effectively a full say in what kind of development happens in your region. Who do you want to start? Sure, we'll start with Mr. O'Connor, then Ms. Hoyt, and then Ms. Darling and Lamb.
So I think that the provisions and the fact that substitution or harmonization is possible isn't completely new to this bill. In the past, and so historically to this day, there have been parallel processes going on, and of course we've asked for that to be simplified and to have one process throughout this and previous reviews to the legislation. Similar requests have been made by the Kativik Environmental Advisory Committee that I spoke about. I guess one of our concerns, and I understand that the provisions that are in the Act now leave the door open for that to happen. I think the case of northern land claims is different because they are established, because they have processes that are working and are going to be happening. So the fact that the James Bay Northern Quebec regime will be applied to a project or not isn't a question. It will be. And the same is true for any development in the offshore area through the NILCA processes. Now, the question is, do we need another layer on top of that? Personally, I think no. Nunavik hasn't been a region where there's been a lot of major development projects that have been assessed. The last one was in 2012, a mining project that was assessed, and at that time, the federal agency, the CIA, did apply to the region. So we had 3 ongoing review processes for the same project. And one of them led by folks who were completely unfamiliar with the region, depended on the communities for logistics, depended on the communities for everything, essentially. And it was a bit of a frustrating experience for everyone involved.
Unfortunately, we're a little short on time, so I'm going to quickly ask the other 3 to also comment on my question and whether their fix for this is to remove the minister's discretion, that it would become automatic that substitution takes place.
Nunavut government's in a slightly different position than the other 2 the other three Inuit regions, in that we do not have a harmonized environmental assessment process in our land claim agreement. Our environmental assessment chapter lays out different regimes depending on where in the settlement area the project ends up, and if it's a project that goes on private land, Inuit private land and provincial crown land, and is also on a federal designated project list, we do currently have the potential under CA 2012, and we will continue under C69 to have the potential for at least 3 environmental assessments to happen concurrently. So that problem is not solved here because we don't have a harmonized process to substitute.
Brought to the government's attention in your consultations?
Yes, we've been very, very clear and consistent in our messaging, all the Inuit regions on that
Right.
throughout.
I'd like to quickly go to Ms. Darling and Ms. Lamian.
Thank you. The question you just posed with respect to removing the minister's discretion and whether that would resolve the issue, it would to a certain extent, and that's what we were looking at Section 4 as a bit of a carve out along the lines that Mr. O'Connor mentioned during his presentation. But one of the things we did propose in our written submissions to this committee was to include a substitution process that is automatic, but in reverse, a jurisdiction could request that the minister exercise his or her authority to substitute the federal process if it was found that there were capacity issues or something like that, to allow the development of capacity within the region. So this is sort of the substitution provision that's recommended in the bill in Section 31, but in reverse.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Duncan?
Thank you very much. The testimony of all of you is really important, and I very much look forward to seeing your brief. But I want to have time to consider the specific amendments you're proposing. As you know, we did hear from Mr. Namagoose, and he made the same kind of proposals about carve-out. One thing that puzzles me is, having heard your testimony, why in C69 we only somewhat carve out Mackenzie Valley Resource Management Act, completely ignoring all the other First Nations self-government and land claim agreements and impact assessment processes of the North. I am wondering, I think it was perhaps Ms. Darling and Lamb that spoke to this, and I wonder if you could clarify. The confusion is also added because not only do we not know the project list, we don't know what's going to be on Schedule 2. So if your entities are included on Schedule 2 so that you have a carve-out or some such, then we probably would have to remove Section 40, which allows the minister to exercise her discretion and impose her system instead. So I'm hoping that your briefs will resolve that. I guess what I'd be asking from all three of you, are you looking for more specific measures in C69 that clearly state a carve-out? And if you want to carve out that your processes apply instead because there's greater confidence of the peoples of your region, do you have sufficient resources in all cases to deliver that? Or do you need some kind of a provision in here where the federal government could assist with funding? So each of the three of you, go ahead. Maybe first Ms. Darling and Lamb.
Thank you very much for that question. It is insightful. The first point I'll make is that the Mackenzie Valley Resource Management Act, just for clarity, it does not apply to the ENVI settlement region. It's specifically
saying that it's the only one that's carved out right now. Yeah.
That's right, and we made a note of that and wondered why or how it came to be. But with respect to your question, a specific carve-out is what ENVI have been advocating for. And just recall that the system in the ENVI settlement region is based on co-management. So the federal government is at that table and is active in the process. With respect to capacity issues do abound, but if they aren't going to be assisted in any regard by applying a parallel process that undermines the land claim process. And so when I was thinking through our comments this morning, one thing I wanted to put to the committee was considering a recommendation that gives the agency authority to provide capacity support to land claim-based impact assessment bodies upon request by a jurisdiction as defined in Bill C-69 under Section 2.
Thanks. Ms. Oye?
Like I said, we have a slightly different situation in terms that we do not have a co-managed EA process. Substitution is an option for us, but it's not as clear because we don't have a process where the different governments are represented collectively. And in terms of resources are always a challenge. We're a small government, and when we have a big project proposed and there are 3, or possibly worst case scenario, there was a project proposed last year that, or 2 years ago, we spent 18 months trying to negotiate a harmonization agreement with the provincial and federal governments. We were unsuccessful. Without a harmonization agreement, it would have been subject to 5 simultaneous environmental impact processes. And the proponent then rejigged their project to avoid us, to reduce the number of EA processes they would have to go through, and then ultimately went bankrupt. Not an efficient way to do it. At the resourcing for us to contribute to 5 processes is very challenging.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yeah, so I very much along the same lines as Kate mentioned, there would need to be obviously some sort of capacity. Our regional assessment processes currently don't have staff capacity. So the NILCA board has 1 employee working for both the Impact Review Board and the Planning Commission. So yes, certainly there would need to be provisions that allow agency staff to provide support that they would otherwise be providing to it.
How much time do I have left?
You are down to 30 seconds.
30 seconds. I wonder, Ms. Hoyt, if you'd like to speak to your call for a non-derogation clause and prior informed consent.
Well, I can speak very quickly to the non-derogation clause, which I didn't realize you guys hadn't seen our submission, so the amendments we proposed in there you haven't seen yet. But the non-derogation clause that's in the current bill is very minimal, and we've proposed language that is a bit more generous and is in line with what the Senate committee proposed when they reviewed non-derogation language. And so we suggest that this act shall be construed so as to uphold existing Aboriginal and treaty rights recognized and affirmed under Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982, and not to abrogate or derogate from them. So it's just a bit more generous language.
Thank you very much. Mr. Amos?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses from afar, and appreciating that it is such a challenge sometimes to provide such testimony, but it is clearly heard and appreciated. I wanted to direct my initial line of questioning to the representatives of the IRC. By way of context, and I want to get into a specific example because I think it might be helpful to examine that circumstance, that example in the IRC's territory to inform this process. So prior to becoming a politician, I represented a conservation organization that was involved in an impact assessment or an environmental assessment process that was being undertaken by the National Energy Board. The project has since been withdrawn. It was in relation to deep water drilling 100 or so kilometers off the coast of Tuck. Obviously, the IRC was going to be a key participant in that process, and there was going to be an integration of some nature. I want to know what you thought was, what you liked and what you didn't like, more importantly, about that process, and how you see the bill that is being proposed as materially changing the way that process might have been undertaken in a positive way. It could be rejected.
You want to?
Pardon?
Did you? That's directed to Mrs. Darling,
Right.
please.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. This is Kate speaking. Unfortunately, I don't have firsthand knowledge of that experience. And Jen was around at that time, so I'll let her share her thoughts as they may be relevant. One thing I will note about this bill that is positive and would be of assistance are the early engagement provisions within it. And this is certainly something that Inuvialuit and our Inuit colleagues from across Inuit Nunangat argued for in the Clyde River case and supported in our submissions to the expert panel and then again to this committee. So the importance of the pre-planning phase and the early engagement is fundamental to ensuring that any kind of delay and duplication isn't experienced with new processes. But again, we have to underscore that the preference is to not have a duplication of processes, but rather one robust system that's adequately supported and consistent with the promises made in the Inuvialuit final agreement. I'll pass it to Jen.
Yeah, so thank you. So during and understanding that, I mean, the deep offshore drilling proposal, it is a very massive sort of review to take on. And much like Kate mentioned, there was a lot of work done prior to even the proposal coming forward, not only from government, but also from industry. Industry they were up in the ISR, they had liaisons in the communities, and there was an ongoing conversation with both the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation and the Inuvialuit Game Council to get a better idea of what they should be bringing forth in terms of the proposal, what concerns they should be addressing from a community level. There was an ongoing slew of workshops that industry worked with the Game Council and IRC on before they even developed their proposal. And I think that kind of speaks to the depth of relationships that the Inuvialuit have been able to build, not only with government, but also with industry. And they've created a very strong relationship with both government and industry. I mean, at the end of the day, the Inuvialuit are for sustainable development, and they understand the need for all this work in the front end in order to create a proposal and development where there are fewer hiccups and challenges down the line. I think that is part of the strength of the IFA.
Okay, so I appreciate that the IFA essentially imposes constitutionally protected obligations to consult, so that kind of behavior is to be expected and anticipated. But in terms of the undertaking of that environmental assessment, which would have been a process, as I understand it, driven effectively by the National Energy Board at the time, was the IRC comfortable, or was the IGC comfortable with that situation?
From what I remember at the time, there was, because the review board was also running they were starting their process, and there was much confusion and lack of communication about how those timelines and processes were going to be implemented and whose spot was going to take over which issues. And I think that, and when the project or the review process was kind of paused, I think many kind of stood back and were wondering, okay, if this were to go ahead, how would it have gone through. There was still a lot of confusion about, the roles of the different boards as well as the NEB and how they were going to talk to each other.
Thank you very much. Sorry that we've run out of time on that line of questioning. Monsieur Godin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. J'aimerais
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses as well because they've shed a lot of light on this subject. We've been dealing for some weeks now with a 400-page bill, and I'm no expert in it. I'm not claiming to be. Therefore, I find your comments very relevant. They're helping us do our work as parliamentarians. Ms. Lamb, in your presentation earlier, you mentioned that you supported the objectives of the bill. But I have a simple question for you. Are those objectives, are we going on the right path to attain these objectives? Ms. Lamb, my question is for Ms. Lamb.
So I think the spirit of the bill, is in the right direction. And I think, at least for the Game Council, they found it very promising, the manner about which the government went consulting and working with the land claim groups, striking the expert panel, and building understanding of what they were trying to do. And I think the intent of the bill, is in the right track. And so the purpose is to foster sustainability and, protect the environment, then the health and social economic conditions. That is all hand in hand with the land claims. And I think for the new Iqaluit, so I think the main point that we want to put forth was what we've provided this morning to you all, to provide that clarity and certainty for both the land claim groups as well as for industry and government.
Merci, Madame Lam.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lam. You're saying that we're on the right track in your answer, but you're not reassuring me about what we should do to best attain the objectives. My question is for now, Ms. Darling. You expressed some concern about Section 31 concerning substitution. You weren't very comfortable with the definition of Annex 2 because it wasn't clearly defined. What should be done to calm your concerns? And my question again is for Ms. Darling. Thank you very much. I wasn't able to hear the concerns that you are referring to. In my comments, you spoke about Part 4, where Appendix 2 was not well defined, and you did have some concern about defining the projects that would fall under Part 2, Annex 2.
So in Section 4 of the Act, it's a very broad non-application clause. And so it's unclear because Schedule 2 has yet to be defined. It's unclear whether this would remedy any of the concerns that Iqaluit have brought forward on the issue of the application of the Act to this region. And instead of applying to jurisdictions, which is what Iqaluit have over their land and region by virtue of the IFA, this section applies simply to land. And so the text that we're recommending is to improve the clarity of that section in order to provide for a carve-out, as Mr. O'Connor called it, or a non-application to those jurisdictions that have land claim agreements, that have environment or impact assessment systems within them.
Merci, Madame Darling.
Thank you very much, Ms. Darling. My third question is from Ms. Hoyt. Ms. Hoyt, if I were to summarize just in a few words, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I understood that you had concerns about the projects that would be assessed. They would not take into account the viability and the public interest of your group, your Indigenous groups. Can you then say that this bill will gradually eliminate the rights and the non-viability of several Aboriginal groups?
That this bill specifically will eliminate the rights of Indigenous groups, but that overall the federal laws have tended in that direction, and that we are concerned that this law does not move in the opposite direction as it could be.
Ce qui veut dire que ça améliore.
Which means that it is not improving the situation for your rights.
It does not, by not seeking consent, it does not, it continues to allow the federal government to have power over the Indigenous groups.
Merci, Madame Hoyt. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
At this point, I'm going to thank our guests very much for their time. It is your testimony has been incredibly helpful to us. You're on the ground, you're dealing with this daily, and your advice is welcome. The reason I'm stopping now is because we do have another panel. I want to make sure that we're fair to both panels and give each panel 45 minutes because we will have to close the meeting just before 2 to be able to get over to the House in time for QP. So thanks again to our guests. Suspend. Thank you. Not calling anybody out, but anyone that's at the back, can they come back to the table? So we're going to resume. Thank you very much. I'm going to introduce our witnesses for the second panel. We'll start with the Canadian Environmental Law Association, and we have Richard Lindgren there, counsel. Welcome. We have the Métis Nation Council, Kathy Hodgson-Smith, who's a barrister and solicitor at Hodgson-Smith Law. Welcome. We have Mixtu Cree First Nation, Melody Lepine, Director, Government and Industry Relations. Thank you. And Mark Gustafson, Associate, JFK Law Corporation. And with Tsleil-Waututh Nation, Chief Maureen Thomas, and John Konofsky, Senior Advisor. Welcome to both, to all of you. And I'm just trying to figure out who might like to start with us. You'll have 10 minutes. I will hold up a yellow card when you've got 1 minute to go. I hate interrupting. And when you've got out of time, I'll hold up the red card. Don't just stop what you're saying. Just wrap it up if you could in a rapid way. So who'd like to start? Mr. Lindgren?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
The floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And good afternoon, members of the committee. The Canadian Environmental Law Association welcomes this opportunity to speak to the Impact Assessment Act. As you may know, CELA is an Ontario Legal Aid clinic. We've been around since 1970. We specialize in environmental law, and on behalf of our clients, we've been involved in federal EA proceedings under the ERP guidelines, SIA 1992 and SIA 2012. And it is on the basis of that experience that we have assessed and evaluated the Impact Assessment Act. And in our conclusion, the Act is inadequate and incapable of regaining public trust in the federal process. Now, I've set out the detailed reasons for that conclusion in our written submissions that I filed with the clerk and that I've provided to each member of this committee. I'm not sure if you had a chance to read it or whether it's caught up with you yet. And I should say at the outset, Madam Chair, I apologize for the length and the complexity of those written submissions. I don't get paid by the word. I'm just simply trying to identify all the things in the Act that need to be fixed, and frankly, that's a long list. In our written submissions, we've also offered 35 different recommendations in relation to the Act. You'll be relieved to hear, Madam Chair, I don't intend to go through all 35 this afternoon. I don't have time in any event. I thought it might be more helpful and perhaps more efficient for me to simply highlight the top 5 concerns that we have about the bill. And in my respectful submissions, the problems with the Act really arise from the unfortunate decision to use SIA 2012 as the starting point for the Act, as opposed to beginning with a clean slate and drafting a whole new statute. In my respectful submission, Madam Chair, it's obvious and regrettable that the basic architecture of SIA 2012 has been carried forward into the Impact Assessment Act, subject only to a handful of new provisions that frankly do not fully fix the problems and the weaknesses associated with SIA 2012. In my view, replacing one deficient law with another deficient law will not do the trick if we're serious about sustainability and if we're serious about restoring public confidence. If anything, the Act as drafted will continue or compound the many problems that we see right now in recent SIA cases. And so what are the major concerns, Madam Chair? I've boiled them down to 5 overarching concerns. Number 1, the Act creates excessive discretion at virtually every assessment stage and every decision point under the legislation. You've heard that concern from several other witnesses, and I fully agree with them. Now, in making that submission, Madam Chair, I recognize that giving broad discretion confers maximum flexibility to federal officials, but at the same time, it significantly diminishes the certainty and the predictability that proponents and members of the public and others are asking for in the federal process. Number 2, the Act fails to establish an independent quasi-judicial authority for gathering information and making credible evidence-based decisions. This was one of the most important and far-reaching recommendations of the expert panel, yet the proposed Impact Assessment Act does not reflect it at all. Instead, the Act simply retains political decision-making on the basis of some vague considerations. And that's not a new and improved regime, Madam Chair. That's essentially same old, same old. And in this regard, I concur with Mr. Northey's testimony last week when he strongly endorsed the need for an independent body or a tribunal to make decisions under this Act. Number 3, the Act fails to entrench meaningful public participation in all key phases of impact and regional and strategic assessments, as well as in the self-assessment process that's been outlined for projects on federal lands. In short, too many critical details for public participation have been left out of the Act or have been left to unknown future regulations or undrafted guidance materials. That's not good enough, Madam Chair. Number 4, the Act fails to limit or prohibit life cycle regulators from being members or even chairs of review panels under the Act. This represents another key recommendation from the expert panel that has not been implemented in this legislation. And to be clear, Madam Chair, CELA does not object to having life cycle regulators participate in the review panel process, but regulators should not be leading or co-leading the impact assessment for the reasons offered by the expert panel. And finally, number 5, the Act fails to include mandatory triggers or clear procedures for the conduct, content, and outcome of regional and strategic assessments. Again, as several other witnesses have noted, and I concur with their submissions. So, Madam Chair, in conclusion, I urge the committee to take a hard, long look at the proposed Act. And if you agree with CELA and many other witnesses that there are fundamental problems with the Act as proposed, then that seems to leave this committee with very few viable options. Given its fundamental flaws, the whole Act really should be rewritten in its entirety. That's certainly my preference, and that would be my primary recommendation to this committee. But of course, given the committee's rather compressed timeline for reviewing Bill C-69, it appears to me that a complete do-over of the Impact Assessment Act does not appear to be a realistic option for this committee to undertake on its own in the time frame. So that leaves us with one other potential option, which is to try to patch up this Act with a series of piecemeal amendments here and there. But to me, Madam Chair, that seems like putting on Band-Aids when the patient really needs major surgery. So that piecemeal approach will not work. From a public interest perspective, CELA submits it's far more important to get this law right than it is to rush things and get a bad law passed. In my view, the expert panel report gave all of us an excellent blueprint for constructing the new impact assessment law. And so if this committee is inclined to amend the legislation, then let's use the expert panel report, not CEA 2012, as the starting point for doing what's right. So subject to any questions, Madam Chair, those are my submissions.
Thank you very much. And what we'll do is we'll hear from all the panel members and then we'll go to questions. I'm wondering if Ms. Hodgson-Smith would like to go next.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm hoping my voice maintains. Apologies. On behalf of Métis National Council President Clément Chartier, he thanks the committee for its important work and study and for creating space for the Métis Nation in this important dialogue. The Métis people, as you know, constitute a distinct Indigenous people based in Western Canada that grounds its assertion and nationhood in well-respected international principles. With a shared history, culture, language, and traditional territory which spans the Prairie Provinces and goes into parts of Ontario, British Columbia, Northwest Territories, and the Northern United States. We have had a long legal struggle to find a place constitutionally, a lot of political struggle to find our way into recognition under Section 35 through the decision of the Manitoba Métis Federation case, where the issue of relationship to land and outstanding historic grievances was before the Supreme Court. And most recently, we have the decision of the Supreme Court in Daniels, which has clarified the issue of jurisdiction in terms of the Métis under Section 9124. We have experienced significant isolation and exclusion under the absence of clarity under Section 9124. So with this recent clarification, it has brought us to this table to make comment on federal legislation while still having a significant bundle of outstanding grievances, including rights of authority over territory, lands, resources, and without having developed robust relationships with industry or government over the last number of years. And I was reflecting on the submissions of the Inuit recently of their success stories. I reflected upon the success of co-management under parks, where part of that success grows out of long-standing historic relationships, where people together have looked at, for example, environmental assessment over a 30-year period. So for the Métis Nation, we are embarking on negotiations under Section 35 and the design of what we hope to be parallel systems of engagement with the Métis Nation on environmental impact. So in the absence of that, we have been looking at existing structures to see what works and where does this particular piece of legislation create the space for what could be negotiated? And does it close doors on opportunities? Canada has made commitments to fully implement the UN Declaration on a principled basis to address the needs of the Métis Nation and to implement obligations under 9124. It's committed to protecting Section 35 rights. The Act, as it's currently proposed, lacks those commitments front and center, not just in a preambular kind of way, but in a way that decision-making mechanisms and processes could reflect and do reflect a genuine implementation of jurisdiction and authority of Indigenous peoples over particular lands. This is the context in which we have come to look at Bill C-69. So when I look, for example, on the issue of decision-making, one of the questions we had was to try and flowchart out where Indigenous authorities would make decisions, when and where, at what point in the process is an Indigenous consideration considered. And there was an impossible flowchart to draft. And so what we recommend, therefore, is clarity and reconsideration around the decision-making structures. Now, there are several triggers, I think, of the Métis and Cumberland House who are dealing with the changing water flows of the dam that are seeing accumulative effects and build up and saying, what's the trigger? How do we trigger an environmental assessment on this? And I then go to the legislation and say, where would that trigger be? And I don't see that trigger. I don't see where the inclusion of the Indigenous peoples in decision-making is there for determining what are the effects. Have we done sufficient research and analysis to know the effects? Is the evidence sufficiently long? What are the effects on Indigenous rights? And then real clarity on what is the public interest test? And I'm reminded of the recent Supreme Court of Canada comments on the public interest and balancing the public interest, where they said, the public interest and the duty to consult do not operate in conflict. The duty to consult, being a constitutional impairment, gives rise to a special public interest that supersedes other concerns typically considered by tribunals tasked with assessing the public interest. A project authorization that breaches the constitutionally protected rights of Indigenous peoples cannot serve the public interest. So a review of the decision-making points, I think, are important. What gets on a project list, what's on Schedule 2 remains a mystery. So just in their area. The other broader lens in terms of the promises of government and the path forward that I think Indigenous peoples have felt will be an effective one is the nation-to-nation, government-to-government approach. And that approach is really not here either. There is kind of a generic category of Indigenous group, community, people. And so how the relationship unfolds in terms of reconciliation moving forward is an important consideration. And so if there is a recognition of a nation-to-nation relationship, there is then, in the implementation of the legislation, a clarity on appropriate representatives, appropriate and effective investments in capacity, which are crucial and need to be ongoing and substantive. And for the Métis Nation, without any capacity, when you're standing still, it's a very huge job to get you the momentum going. To determining effective partnerships, to clarifying when consent is achieved or what mechanism is best placed to advance consent, and in that way legal certainty, to ensure the proper protection and use of Indigenous knowledge, and I use that as a broader category than traditional knowledge, in the sense that in this country we don't have protections for Indigenous knowledge. That's left for Indigenous people to manage on their own. And once it goes into the public realm, where does it go? How is it used? And what is the mechanism around that? That is unclear, perhaps subject to a guideline or a schedule yet to be determined. And I think it would also allow the Indigenous people's expertise on sustainability to have meaningful influence on decision making. So in imagining there are many strengths to this piece of legislation and early engagement and other mechanisms. With a bit more focus on the Indigenous peoples, I think you could have a much stronger piece of legislation that meets a lot of needs, including those of industry and broader Canadians.
Thank you very much. How about Chief Maureen Thomas? Would you like to go next?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I would like to acknowledge all the committee members that are here today to listen to us, and thank you very much. I would also like to acknowledge that we were on the Algonquin territory. Thank them. And I know I have a prescripted thing in front of me, but I'm never very good at doing that. So I would like to just go speak. My ancestral name is Seithlame Alwit. It comes from my Semiahmo family. I'm a part of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation now, which is located in North Vancouver along the North Shore. Tsleil-Waututh is a community on the North Shore, but at one time our ancestors inhabited the whole of the North Shore. We are very central to a highly urbanized region, and we are a tiny little piece of property there. And we are so impacted by the human element, by industry. There are so many things that impact our well-being, the well-being of the whole of the city of Vancouver. So today we are going to be talking about the impact assessment part of Bill C-69. And the other key component, I've been just this morning or this afternoon, there is a lot of discussion talking about Indigenous jurisdiction. And I think that's where I will focus. John Konosky is here with me, and he will speak to some of the detail. He's better at it than I am. But when you think about Indigenous jurisdiction, I know right away, I'm sure when I look at all of you here, all these red flags are going to go up. you immediately are going to look at all the risks, you know, and what does that really mean? What's it really going to mean to Canada? I was recently, someone said to me, relationships are important. And when I look at you guys, you're the Liberal, you're the NDP, you're the Conservative. You're here for Canada. You have to have a relationship. You don't always have to agree, but that relationship amongst you to run this country is so important. Without each other, you cannot do that. You bring that balance. That's how I foresee First Nations and the jurisdiction that we have. And I'm going to say I have it for my community. It's inherent. It's within us to be stewards of our land. We're here to protect it. We're here to ensure it's there for our grandchildren down the road. There is nothing that is going to stop us from protecting it. So when you, I don't want to say you, sorry. So when things come into our territory, we have to ensure that what's brought there doesn't leave a lifelong risk where it's going to extinguish us being on that territory for my children and grandchildren down the road. So I appreciate your looking at this act with the idea that the existing one is inadequate. And I also want to acknowledge how important that is for all of you to get it right, how important it is for Canada. And I know right now, I know he wants it all rewritten. I know that is going to be challenging, and for me, every little bit of improvement along the way is all we can truly ask for. If there is improvement, if there is this true desire of reconciliation, all these words mean nothing to me in the sense that they're words from here. It's when you start living those words that I can truly come to this table and work with you to find a way to improve all of our living and well-being for today, tomorrow, and well into the future. That's what Tsleil-Waututh is about. We're not about taking anything from you. We're not about making life difficult for you. We're here to help you. We're here to work with you. And without that ability to do it, we're going to fail. If we're not allowed to have this freedom and these rights to protect, you're going to fail, and we don't want that. And you don't have to be afraid of us. Sure, you're going to have communities. Everybody's at a different level across Canada, including your constituencies. So First Nations are no different. We're all at a different capacity. We live in different regions. We have different strengths and weaknesses, but in our heart and soul, we're all the same, including you. You want to protect what we have. And I know you guys can see the damage that's going on to this global world of ours. And that is what we're here for. We're not here about, oh, let's fight with the Liberals, let's fight with the NDP, let's ignore the Native people. It's not about that. This whole process, this document is about the environment and how we're going to protect it and how we're going to move forward into the future. I can honestly tell you, from my perspective, I care about each and every one of you. I care about your well-being. That's who we are. We're not here to fight with you. We're not here to cause problems for you. I know it's seen that way, but you always have to look at the bigger picture. And that's how I approach everything. That's why I have no idea what's in this document. So thank you.
Thank you. I hesitate to follow up on that with some technical details. Thank you, Chief Thomas. And I will say that we have submitted a number of recommendations in our written submission, and I'll refer you to those. There are a number of ways that the bill could change, but we have tried to identify some key things that we think need to happen. And the first really relates to what Chief Thomas said. There needs to be a way to self-identify as a jurisdiction in the bill. And so we have submitted in our written testimony an additional definition of a jurisdiction under Section 2 that allows self-identification. And that's really, I think, of all the things we could possibly say, that's the key issue that Chief Thomas has just raised. It's no longer, we can't have a system where we have to go through another process to be identified as a jurisdiction. It needs to be consistent with the Prime Minister's commitment to recognition and implementation of an Indigenous rights framework. And so I really think that that amendment that we have proposed is really key. The other thing, I agree with the panel members on another issue, that the bill provides wide discretion for the minister. And if the discretion remains in the Act, Tsleil-Waututh requires some sort of safety valve to address disputes. In particular, Tsleil-Waututh is concerned that the Act in general makes no mention of an appeals process in the event of a disagreement. While the Act provides an opportunity for Indigenous groups to participate as jurisdictions, it falls short of true decision-making. We therefore believe a dispute resolution process is necessary. One option is the tribunal idea that was floated at the panel. We would be supportive of that idea, but if that doesn't sit well with the committee, we would, at a minimum, request that there be an automatic right of appeal included directly in the legislation. Our preference, and we have provided language to this effect in our written testimony, is to broadly construe that right of appeal. But stepping back a little bit more, when you look at the factors in Section 16, 22, and 63, we see that Indigenous communities are subsumed under factors to consider. And we really assert that the constitutionally protected rights of Indigenous communities are different than the other factors in that list. And so at the barest minimum, there needs to be an automatic right of appeal should there be infringement or the threat of infringement on Indigenous rights. That's really the other key that we want to drive home here for the committee today. And with that, I'll let the written testimony speak to the rest of our comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll be getting into some of it with the questions as well. So next up, who would like to go first? Ms. Lapine, please go ahead.
Can you hear me? There we go. Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, committee members. It's an honor to be on Algonquin territory today, and thank you for the invitation to speak. I hold the position of Director of Government and Industry Relations with the Mikisew Cree First Nation. I'm joined today with Mark Gustafson. Mark is legal counsel that is assisting me on numerous regulatory files and will be helping me answer some of your questions today. Mikisew has prepared a written brief. That brief contains detailed legislative amendments we ask you to consider. The Mikisew Cree is the largest Treaty 8 First Nation within the Athabasca Oil Sands region. Our office has been reviewing numerous environmental impact assessments for the last 17 years and have directly participated in about 8 joint regulatory hearings, raising environmental concerns and concerns about impacts to our culture and way of life. Our traditional territory has a convergence of federal interests. It's home to Canada's largest national park, a World Heritage Site designated under UNESCO, is inclusive of transboundary waters, provides one of North America's most important migratory bird pathways, and is home to iconic species like woodland caribou and wood bison. Recently, the UN's World Heritage Committee sent experts to review the state of Wood Buffalo National Park. After we raised concerns that Canada is not doing enough to deal with downstream impacts from hydro dams and oil sands development. Those experts found that Canada is failing the park and the Indigenous people within it. Flaws in Canada's environmental assessment process played a role in this embarrassing outcome for Canada. The 2017 IUCN World Heritage Conservation Outlook says that the park is now of significant concern and has a trend of deteriorating. I cannot stress enough how important federal assessments are to creating better relationships with industry and government, in building healthy communities, and protecting federal environmental interests. That's the lens we have used to review Bill C-69. For us, the most disappointing part of Bill C-69 is that it likely means that the federal government is abandoning the best tool it has to protecting Canada's largest World Heritage Site from the very activities that have put the national park on the verge of being added to the list of World Heritage Sites in danger. It is also abandoning a key tool for respecting the Migratory Bird Convention, abandoning a key tool for protecting iconic federally recognized species at risk, and for reaching Canada's greenhouse gas goals. It is also abandoning the best tool available for us in implementing UNDRIP and recognizing our right to be part of decisions that affect our livelihood. How have we come to that view? It comes down to triggers and what is happening in the oil sands. As the bill is currently drafted, federal assessments will only happen if an activity is on the project list or the minister makes a discretionary decision to require it. We agree that both have a place in the bill, but they aren't enough for the federal government to protect its interests. First, the project list is a blunt tool. It's meant to capture mega projects, and it's useful in that regard. But it isn't flexible enough to be responsive to key areas of federal jurisdiction like World Heritage Sites, species at risk, or transboundary waters. It has been our experience that the project list excludes many of the activities that have been shown to directly and cumulatively impact species at risk and the Peace Athabasca Delta. As it stands, the project list means that you will likely never see another federal assessment in the oil sands region. Let me repeat that. Even though industrial activities are putting a national park, woodland caribou, bison at huge risk, there may never be another federal assessment as this bill is currently drafted. This is because the future of oil sands is the expansion of countless smaller projects that are of less capital intensive but equally problematic for federal environmental interests. Second, while there is a process for updating the project list underway, not a single request we have ever made for an activity to be added to the project list or its predecessor have ever been accepted. Third, discretionary decisions to require assessments are inherently hard to deal with, and they don't provide certainty to anyone. They also leave that important decision up to political lobbying campaigns that in the end undermine the very trust in the system you are trying to restore. Fourth, on many occasions, we've requested a federal assessment because a project could impact federal matters and our rights, and the answer has been no. From that perspective, the new criteria for guiding discretionary decision isn't likely to make a difference. Where does this leave us? We believe there is a path forward that will allow you to be responsive to core federal jurisdiction without upsetting the structure of the bill. Our proposal would provide greater certainty to Canadians that key federal matters are being properly assessed. At the same time, it would easily merge with the new planning phase to ensure the assessment matches the size and complexity of the proposed activity. In other words, it won't create delays. You'll find our proposal solution on page 7 of our brief. First, it entails creating a modest third way to trigger assessments. This category is tightly scoped to core matters of federal jurisdiction. Second, we've also proposed that the minister develop sub-regional regulations with new assessment triggers where a regional assessment has determined an area that is experiencing a high degree of cumulative impacts. This flows from normal impact assessment practice. Once thresholds are exceeded, even a small impact can have serious consequences. Next, I will highlight a few other proposals in our brief that connect with questions the committee has asked over the last few weeks about what the bill means for achieving Indigenous consent. In my years of experience, when there is a federal assessment, we have a better chance of getting the information we need to make informed decisions and getting us on a path to consent. The same cannot be said for provincial regulatory processes. The Alberta regulatory process creates a loss of trust, animosity, and in the end, creates legal and investment uncertainty for proponents. So if the government is serious about getting First Nation consent in a timely and effective way, the key starting point is improving the triggers for when assessments take place. Another way to advance this goal is to make sure that the Act works for Indigenous consultation. We have proposed a few modest changes on pages 8 and 9 of our brief for improving how timelines are calculated and how the agency works with us to improve our chances of getting to consent. Next, there are a few inconsistencies in the bill we have identified in terms of criteria for decision-making and tracking through the improved language around traditional knowledge. We propose solutions for these on page 9 of our brief. Before I make my closing comments, I want to highlight that our brief also covers the Navigable Waters Act. The key issue we have brought to your attention is that the Act needs a key tweak to enter the 21st century. If you come to our territory, you'll hear everyone talk about impediments to navigation. But the huge impediments we are facing are barely covered by the Act because it is primarily focused on physical barriers. Activities that change the flow of rivers is what impacts navigation most heavily in our region. There are a couple new sections in the Act that start to get at this issue, but they are essentially inadequate. If you want to make a difference to our way of life and inland navigation, fix these provisions. I want to leave you with a quick snapshot of our proposal. First, take federal jurisdiction seriously. When you do, you protect Canada's international standing, respect Indigenous people, and build a stronger economy. All that is needed is to add a small list of legislative triggers to provide a backstop to the project list. Those are in our brief. We are confident that Canadians and industry would support reviews for projects that could impact nationally important species like caribou and bison and Canada's World Heritage Sites. Second, recognize and respect your treaty partners. As the Supreme Court said, consultation with Indigenous peoples is always in the public interest. That can start to be achieved if you adjust the wording around timelines and better incorporate the UN Declaration. We've given you a few recommendations to get there. Lastly, make the space for certainty and good decision-making. That means fixing the triggers for assessment and clarifying the considerations for decision-making. Bill C-69 is far from perfect and less than we expected to see after months of engagement on EA reform, but it can be improved. Thank you for your time.
Thank all of you very much for the very detailed recommendations that you've made. We don't have all your briefs yet in front of us. I think your brief came in just after the deadline, but because you're one of the groups that we had identified we wanted to hear from, I authorized quite a few briefs that came in late, and so it's in translation right now, so we should be getting that by the end of the week. All right, just so that you know that we don't have it in front of us. Okay. All right, so starting up, Mr. Basio.
Thank you, Chair, and thank all of you very much for being here today. Rick Lindgren, great to see you, sir. Rick and I have had a relationship, have worked together for 20 years where he represented a community organization that I was a part of, and we've gone through one full environmental assessment in the process of another environmental assessment, a judicial review, and an environmental review tribunal. Together. So we've got a lot of experience in that, and going through that process creates a lot of concerns for me around meaningful public participation and the importance that to both proponents and the public of an appeal mechanism to uphold accountability and oversight. So I'd like you to if you could please highlight for us some of the areas that in the bill that could be improved to ensure that we have meaningful public participation and the importance of having that appeal mechanism like an environmental review tribunal.
Thank you, Mr. Basio, for the question. In my view, meaningful public participation is the condition precedent to informed decision-making and to restoring public confidence in the process. The problem with the bill as drafted is that it provides few, if any, details as to how public participation is going to be provided under this bill, particularly in relation to project level assessments. And so, for example, I draw your attention to Section 27 of the bill, which simply says when conducting an assessment, the agency shall provide an opportunity for the public to participate. And that's it. No indication of how, when, through what mechanism, when's participant funding going to be provided, is it going to be provided in the planning phase? Those essential requirements are wholly absent from the bill. And that's regrettable because that's exactly the same provision that was in SIA 2012, the one that was found to be wholly deficient by the EA expert panel. So I would have expected further and better details about public participation in this bill, the Impact Assessment Act, and they're almost wholly absent. So to fix that, that's, do you want the long list or the short list? I mean, at the very minimum, I would expect to see a good definition of meaningful public participation. I provided one in my submissions. I think the preamble and the statement of purposes should be expanded to, again, breathe some life into the concept of meaningful public participation. And then at each and every stage of the planning process, the impact assessment process, there should be, explicit requirements in terms of access to information, reasonable notice, the ability of people to call and cross-examine witnesses. Those are the kinds of procedural safeguards that I say are essential to the timely and effective exercise of public participation rights. If you don't have them, if you don't have those safeguards built into law, those public participation rights are hollow. Now, in terms of the preference for a tribunal, Mr. Bazio, as you know, I've been practicing environmental law in this province for over 3 decades. I spent a lot of time before this province's environmental tribunals. And I say to you, if you really are interested in having meaningful public participation, you want procedural fairness, you want accountable evidence-based decision-making, the tribunal route is the way to go. If you want over-politicized, highly controversial backroom deal-making, go the route of this act. But you can't pretend to be restoring public trust by avoiding the public scrutiny of a tribunal and leaving it ultimately to the minister and or cabinet to make a decision at the end of the day. I'd have to say, if this bill is passed intact without any amendments, I would be hard-pressed to advise a client to participate in the impact assessment process. I'd say, why bother? Why spin your wheels? Why spend literally months or years raising funds and making submissions and doing everything you need to do at the agency level or the review panel level, only to have that mean little or nothing when the decision actually gets to the decision maker? So that's why I strongly support the principle there should be an administrative tribunal that's fully equipped and properly resourced to make the decisions. They hear the evidence. They can assess the credibility of the witnesses. They observe the demeanor of the witnesses. They are in the best position to make the decision. Unfortunately, that process is not reflected in this bill.
Can you, if you could very quickly, how do you see the role of the federal court system in this and comparing the tribunal process to the court system?
Well, in theory, the courts are there to ensure compliance with statutory requirements. That's their traditional function on judicial review. And so, the courts are there to provide some level of judicial oversight. The problem is when you leave these things in very vague terms, the courts are reluctant to intervene. I can tell you this because I've been chewed up and spit out by the federal court a few times on these kinds of issues where we've gone, on behalf of our clients, we've gone to court and we've indicated to the court, well, there's little or no evidence to support this finding or this conclusion. And the court said, well, you know what? They've mentioned the word need or purpose or alternatives. So at least they've cast their mind to that issue. And we're not, they've given it some consideration, so we're not prepared to intervene. So that, unfortunately, there's a limit.
Would you agree, though, that on the tribunal, the importance of it is the fact you've got a panel of experts in the environment, in all of the different areas of sustainability that are supposed to be the purpose of the law?
That's the whole purpose of a specialized administrative tribunal in modern-day Canada.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Lindgren.
Thank you. Mr. Sopak?
Thank you very much. One of the things that puzzled me about all the testimony today from both our panels, little or nothing was said about, jobs, economic development, and the importance for people to have incomes. I used the phrase in the last meeting, if someone has a livelihood, they have a life. And I think it's important that we focus on jobs, economic development, all done in an environmentally sound way. Just for the panel's benefit, I'm a fisheries biologist and spent my whole life, my career being involved in environmental assessment and conservation. But I represent a natural resource constituency, and again, just for review, the natural resources sector, I'm quoting from a study here, accounts for 13% of GDP and 50% of exports. When spin-off industries are added, the contribution of natural resources to GDP jumps to nearly 20%. About 950,000 Canadians currently work in the natural resource sectors, and another 850,000 workers spread across every province and territory. This is about 1 in 10 jobs in Canada. In addition, the energy, mining, and forestry industries provide over $30 billion a year in revenue to provincial and federal governments, providing all of us with the public services that we so greatly need. So my first question is to you, Ms. Lepine. We had testimony from Fort McKay Chief Jim Boucher. I should let you know I spent time in the oil sands. I worked on the Curl project close to Fort McKay. He pointed out this. It was pointed out in this article that Fort McKay has a zero unemployment rate, with members enjoying average annual incomes of $120,000 and financial holdings in excess of $2 billion, thanks to its willingness to do business. And the Mikisew Cree, I guess, have just purchased 15% of a Suncor facility. Isn't this just isn't this a major success story to be celebrated by your community? Because I think you've done remarkable work here based on these numbers. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Our community has celebrated that success story. I want to also note that livelihood that you mentioned also refers to a way of life and cultural intactness in which we do need, I think, an environment that supports that way of life and that livelihood as well. And we should not restrict those members of our community that choose to have the ability to have those meaningful livelihoods, not only for today, but for future generations. I mean, good projects come from good assessments. Good assessments come from ensuring that a healthy environment and healthy community to advance the economic opportunities that are provided to us, I think, are very important. But without proper assessments and assessing impacts to rights and impacts to our way of life, our culture, and to our social well-being, you can have all of the opportunities in the world provided to Indigenous communities, but if they're not ready and if they're not provided the ability to participate in federal assessments in a meaningful consultation way, then those opportunities mean nothing to us.
Well, obviously, good environmental assessments are important. Industry has never said that they want an easy way out. But again, what happens far too often, though, is you get an endless process and market opportunities are missed. One of my first careers was working on pipeline assessment in the Mackenzie Valley, and I came across an article December of last year that the Mackenzie Valley pipeline is now off the books completely. And one of the Aboriginal people who worked there said, the mayor-elect of Tuktoyaktuk, we had a lot of high hopes. We even built a new hotel in Inuvik in the hopes the pipeline was going to take off. What they're really saying is that these are communities that have lost a major economic opportunity. The other thing is we had a very interesting testimony from Chief Ernie Cray from the Cheem First Nation, and he's one of 43 First Nations that have mutual benefits agreements with Trans Mountain, reportedly worth more than $300 million. And he talked about how excited his constituents were to receive the training that they were going to receive from Trans Mountain. And I'm going to ask you, Chief Thomas, since you're from British Columbia as well, should Chief Ernie Cray be excited about the development of the Trans Mountain pipeline, given the benefits that he sees for his people?
You can look at it. You can look at it from that perspective.
Sorry, these are his words. They're not mine.
No, but I mean, you can
Okay.
look at it from his perspective, how important it is, this economy, to each First Nation that has signed on in it. And I will never take away anything in that context from how they feel and how they want to conduct their way of life. But I think if you truly look at that statement, I think you should look deeper You look at these communities, the First Nations across the country, and how they're all so isolated, and how everything for them becomes 10 times harder because of the situations the European have placed them in and placed on these reserves, and how confined they are and how restrictive they are in trying to generate a way of life for their being, because they can no longer live the life they at one time did. And not every community has the opportunity to generate an economy because of their location and what's surrounded by them. So I can truly see the importance to them. But again, what are we trying to achieve here? It's the environment, the protection of the environment, and how we're going to do that. And I appreciate the challenge you're faced with, because you really have to look at all those components and really analyze it to come up with the right decisions. So I don't envy you one bit.
So hang on, I'm sorry, I did let that go over because I
Very much.
wanted to hear from the chief,
Thank you.
but we have gone past time. So, Ms. Duncan?
Thank you. I want to thank all of you for your very important testimony. And as I raised my concern to the previous panel, as we have not received most of your briefs yet, I think we're going to need more time as a committee if we're going to come up with recommendations for amendments that reflect your testimony, which is the whole purpose of this committee. My first question would be for Ms. Lapine. And thank you for your brief. I know that you've recently had experience with a strategic assessment because you intervened with UNESCO, and they have now directed that Canada and Alberta have to come up with a strategic assessment. Can you share with us your experience with that, of how well you feel that your nation or any of the other nations and Métis in the area are genuinely being engaged, and whether or not you think the bill as written is actually going to enhance or improve on when you can actually call for a regional or strategic assessment to deal with cumulative impacts, and whether or not the bill actually adequate gives you the right to participate in those strategic or regional assessments.
Okay, I'll ask Mark to just add in any details that I might miss. Yeah, strategic environmental assessment was triggered out of our UNESCO petition. So we actually had to go to the international community to call upon an assessment on a World Heritage Site downstream from oil sands. And so it's quite unfortunate that we had to go that route because of, the failures of environmental assessments again in our region. The way the bill is drafted right now clearly doesn't give us the certainty that this will continue. A lot of projects, including, the Site C, BC Hydro project on the Peace River, failed to assess the dam's impacts on the Peace Athabasca Delta. So we still to this day do not understand how a major hydroelectric project was approved without proper assessing what it means to the impacts to a World Heritage Site. So triggering an SEA through that process, we're quite fortunate that the SEA has been undertaken by Canada, but we had to actually force it to happen. And so if the bill could allow for this certainty for these strategic and regional assessments to happen, then that would provide greater confidence in local communities. Mark, I'm not sure if you'd like to add anything.
The only thing I would add is the question of, so what? If you do an environmental or a strategic or regional assessment, the Act isn't clear on what happens next. Those assessments have to mean something.
Les collectivités demandent certaines choses depuis 30 ans. Nous nous sommes adressés à la collectivité internationale, mais on ne sait pas ce que ça va donner dans ce projet de loi. Pouvez-vous recommencer? Non? Pouvez-vous commencer? Pouvez-vous recommencer?
Il n'entend pas.
Maybe your
better?
channel.
Là, maintenant, oui.
Good?
Good.
Okay, go ahead.
So the fundamental point is regional and strategic assessments have to mean something. They have to lead to some type of change in decision-making and process if that's what the outcome of the assessment suggests. One of the ways we've suggested dealing with that in the Mikisew brief is creating a power so that if a regional or strategic assessment finds that there is a high level of cumulative effects in a region, that there be a process to create new triggers for new assessments that are reflective of that situation.
Okay. Chief Thomas, thank you very much for your remarks. A number of other Indigenous leaders have come forward and called for not only Section 35 be mentioned in the bill, but also the United Nations Declaration. There's a lot of debate about, well, if 40 of 100 chiefs have signed on and they support a project, isn't that enough? I wonder if you could speak to, it's my understanding that under the NDRIP, there isn't a quota system. I think you said very clearly that for the definition of jurisdiction, you want the ability to self-identify and self-determine. So am I correct in your understanding that you're saying that the bill should reflect the fact that each individual Indigenous community should have the right to self-determine?
I think we know we have the jurisdiction. We believe that in our heart, in our being. I think the question is, how is the government going to recognize that? And that's the challenge, because if it's going to be going through so many hoops within the Act, you defeat the purpose. And that's where I wanted to talk again about the relationship and being able to have a relationship with different communities. And every community is at a different level, and every community may want to participate at a different level at a different time. And I think that's what should be flexible within the Act, that it's not so prescriptive that you're going to leave somebody out when they're ready. Not everybody is at a point of moving forward in doing these assessments and having that understanding, or these things may never travel through their territory, that where they're going to need to do this. So it's a and I really appreciate the challenge you're faced with, but I think it should be up to the government to have the ability to recognize the jurisdiction, because we believe we have it. We have that stewardship, that jurisdiction, and we're not here, again, as I keep saying, to cause problems. We want to work with you. And we have done so many successful projects working with different governments at different, whether it's in the ocean or on land or whatever. And I think that respect of each other is what's going to bring us to that parallel where we can work together and not have these problems, if you want to call it that.
Thank you very much. Churns?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome to the panelists. Certainly, we've heard from a lot of different groups with very strong feelings and perspectives on this legislation. But I got a couple of questions for Mr. Lindgren. As we struggle with, of course, the issues of judicial panels and all the other things in terms of the role of government. So, in your view, is there a real way to depoliticize the process without taking away a democratically elected government's ability to make decisions of which they will be held accountable for by Canadians?
Yes. And the expert panel gave you that very recommendation when they said create an independent authority with a limited right to appeal to cabinet. So the answer is staring us all in the face. That's the provision that you can use to get away from over-politicized decision-making and have it decided on the merits.
And just a follow-up question, Mr. Lindgren. Your submission details the problems with timelines, as do others. We've heard from some other groups. So how do we balance the importance of timely and efficient assessments with public and Indigenous participation?
Well, the problem that I see in the current act is that it dictates a one-size-fits-all time frame for agency-led assessments and regional review panels, et cetera. I think it's far better for the parties themselves, in conjunction with the relevant authorities and jurisdictions, to work out their own case-specific or project-specific timelines. That's been done and has been done successfully. I just think sticking to generic one-size-fits-all timelines is not the way to go about it. I think we need to have some more flexibility in the timelines. And I should also add that I think there's a myth out there that environmental groups that I represent, for example, are really interested in bogging down the process and running out the clock and just bogging things down. I can tell you that's not our interest. We don't have the time or the resources or the energy to do that. We want to see fast, timely, efficient processes as well. We want to get to the decision as quickly as we can. So I'm hoping nobody around this table is thinking that we're in it just to slow things down. We want efficiency as well, but not at the expense of robust decision making.
Thank you. I have a question for Ms. Lapine. Your submission talks about the lack of consultation when 2012 changes were introduced. Could you comment on the consultations for Bill C-69? Do you think it was adequate? Or?
From what I recall, I was invited to participate to the review panel and provided a presentation, and then I'm here today. I don't know if this is considered consultation on your part, but I don't believe it was adequate, and the timelines are quite aggressive in terms of our to be honest, I don't even think most of the people in my community are fully aware of Bill C-69, and probably likely a lot of other Indigenous communities.
Can I?
Go ahead, Mark.
Okay. Just a very quick response. So Mikisew has sent in written submissions at every stage of the EA process, just like the Review of Fisheries Act and the Navigable Waters Protection Act. No response has been received to any of those submissions.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Can I just stop the clock for a second. When you send in briefs, are you expecting that the committees get back to you on your briefs? Is that doesn't
That was in the EA review process with the expert panel.
I gotcha. Okay, I was just wanting to make sure I was clear on what that was. Okay, you're sharing your time? Okay. Sure. Mr. Amos?
Certainly, thank you. How much time is there left?
You have about 2 minutes.
Okay. I really wanted to go into that consultation issue and the expectation of response issue, because I think it's an important one. And I would only simply say it's got to be very difficult for in this kind of process for government to respond to, and expert panels to respond to every single comment that is made. It's a Herculean task. But my question goes to Mr. Lindgren, because we've had an ongoing discussion with a number of witnesses on the issue of review, judicial or tribunal-wise, of this process. Now, if there were to, is there a way, in your estimation, to craft a provision or provisions, a set of provisions that would enable, given that a quasi-judicial model has not been chosen for the impact assessment agency, is there a way of engaging that, a form of tribunal, and is there language that you might suggest that would enable that kind of process in such a way that it does not overload and overweight the system, and in such a way that it might even help lighten the federal court system, which is ultimately also available?
Well, the short answer is yes, Mr. Amos. It is possible to construct an appellate body that can hear and resolve disputes arising from the impact assessment process at every stage, whether it's early planning, right in the middle, or at the tail end. Certainly in my brief, I have provided some drafting instructions on what that tribunal might look like as an alternative, but I can certainly undertake to provide more detailed language to this committee in the next day or two to flesh out what that appellate body might look like in order to provide some meaningful oversight and accountability in the impact assessment process.
Thank you.
Like 15 seconds?
I think I'll...
You're good? Okie dokie. Mr. Godin.
Thank you, Mr. Amos.
Merci, Monsieur Amos.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. Witnesses, I also want to thank you for being here. We all share the same goal, and I hope that you can hear me. Are you hearing the interpretation? The interpretation is very faint.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Here's the interpretation. 1, 2, 3. Okay, good. Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much, dear witnesses. I think we all have the same objective in mind, namely to bring about more effective and efficient legislation than what is currently on the books. So I think we can all agree on that. My first question is for the representative of the Environment and the Law group. I didn't quite understand what you said with regard to efficiency, and so if I understood you correctly, you said that this bill does not give back confidence, and you even referred to Section 27 as being very simplistic, if I may use that word to describe what you said. You said C-69 is a shortcut. So I have a very specific question for you, because I believe the current legislation is your bread and butter. Can you compare the timelines with regard to accrediting a project? So if you compare the current law, what is being proposed here, to what's been on the books since 2012.
I think it's fairly clear that the timelines that are now proposed in this act are shorter than what we currently have under CA 2012. The government's rationale for shortening the time frames is that they expect that the early planning phase will result in a scoping of the issues, a narrowing of the dispute, the proper and early engagement of affected communities and Indigenous governing bodies, etc. I think that's kind of wishful thinking based on how the act is drafted right now. I don't think the concerns and the problems that we've had with timing will magically disappear by this early planning phase, and I think it's because there's very little content prescribed in the Act in terms of how the planning process is actually going to work. As drafted, the Act only sets out a screening process for the agency to decide whether or not there's even going to be an environmental assessment of a designated project. So I think I would just say to you, sir, there's lots of room for improvement in making this process work in the way that the government says it should work.
Vous avez dit qu'il y a plusieurs améliorations.
You said that several improvements should be made to this bill. You also said that the bill should be completely redrafted, and that might be the preferred option. I now have a question for Ms. Thomas. I liked what you said, and I liked your philosophy. You said that we have to protect the environment for our future, for our children. You have a very maternal outlook, and I'm a family father, and so I have a paternal outlook. I believe we not only have to bring about legislation that'll protect our children, but also our grandchildren. We have to look at the environment and sustainable development, and we have to keep in mind an economic balance. Now, you said that the environment is important, to which I say yes, but we have to, or rather, you said the bill could be improved. I believe that we can take many small steps in the right direction in order that we take a big leap forward. Now, Mr. Konofsky, you talked about an appeal mechanism. Can you tell us a little more about this appeal mechanism in order to improve the bill?
We, in our written testimony, when you get it, recommend that there be a new section added to the bill, and that it be broadly construed to allow anyone who has an issue with decision-making at any stage of the process to appeal. Now, in our conversations with the government, that has met with some resistance, that such a broad-based kind of mechanism. Our bottom line is that in those list of factors, constitutionally protected Indigenous rights are unique. They need unique protection, and so that in perhaps a new Section 6263, that there be provision specifically for that kind of appeal, should there be infringement or the threat of infringement. Now, that's our bottom line. We agree with the idea of a tribunal as being the best solution, but if the committee doesn't want to go there, that's really the baseline that we need to be satisfied with the bill.
Merci. Je vais poser une question, Madame Lépine.
Thank you. I have a question for Ms. Lépine. Ms. Lépine, you said that Canada is not doing enough based on what some international organizations have said. I probably agree with you, and this is why the government wants to do better. I don't know if it's going to do better with this bill, but more concretely in your statement, you said that the bill barely addresses the obstacles we must overcome because it only addresses physical obstacles. What other obstacles were you referring to?
So we don't have time for the answer, unfortunately. It was a good question, but we do have time for one more question. So, questioner, so maybe we can pick up on that. We'll see. Okay. Mr. Alcio.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Lindgren, I'd like to expand a little bit further on the meaningful public participation piece, if I could quickly, because I had a question on UNDRIP that I wanted to get to as well. And that is, the importance of ensuring that a full breadth of not just definition, but of the mechanisms for meaningful public participation be written into the bill rather than into the regs. And maybe you could explain why it's important that it be right in the Act rather than reflected in the regs.
Well, again, I thank you, Mr. Bosio. I think my starting point would be referring once again to the sparse language we find in the Act. And quite frankly, it's inadequate and unacceptable to simply say, provide an opportunity to participate. We need further and better detail in the Act in terms of, the principles and the mechanisms to ensure meaningful public participation. I fully anticipate that those basic public participation rights would be more fleshed out by regulation. In fact, I anticipate that and said that in my submission to the committee. And there may well be a need for further and better guidance material as well to ensure that we're all on the same page as to how you actually solicit and act upon public input. I guess the observation I would make is we have lots of good guidance material from the agencies and others right now as to how to effect or implement meaningful public participation. It's not being done. And I invite you to look at the expert panel report on that very issue. Simply confining public participation requirements to a single sentence in the Act was found to be utterly deficient by the expert panel. That's why we need to do better under this legislation.
So once again, though, if we, does it suffice to have the words within the Act, meaningful public participation, and then leave it to the courts to determine what that means based on previous arguments within the courts, or is it, or within the regs? I'm just trying to figure out what is the best process in order to get at what meaningful public participation is.
We should build as much of it as we can in the Act. We should supplement it by more detailed regulations as to what it means and how these participation opportunities will be provided on the ground. That's including but not limited to participant funding. I'd rather have that sorted out in the Act, the regulation and guidance materials, than having us trot off to federal court every 2 weeks. That is not going to be a timely and efficient process, as you may know.
Thank you very much. Now to go to our other, I'd like to go to. Mr. Amos and myself are both sit on the Indigenous committee as well, and right now we're studying Bill 262 around UNDRIP, in the implementation of UNDRIP and the framework around it, and of course FPIC is a constant a point of discussion around that, and there seems to be three definitions of free, prior, and informed consent, and one being good faith without necessarily obtaining it, or a type of process, a consensus-oriented process that is sometimes referred to as collaborative consent, or a veto. I guess I'd like to know what the members. I know Mr. Gustafson had mentioned that earlier that they had made a submission around a C68, for example, and within C68 they actually have quite an extensive overview of recognizing Indigenous rights without actually spelling out UNDRIP itself, but a recognition of Indigenous rights. How would you say, one, what is your view of FPEC, and two, what is your view of C68 and how they've defined Indigenous rights and consultation?
That's very good questions, and I guess for protocol reasons, I would ask whether any of the Indigenous participants want to jump in first, and then I can pick up second, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, of course.
Michelle.
That's a really tough one. Again, we're talking about, we know we have jurisdiction, we know, and it's about building that relationship so that we can work together. And I don't like to get caught up in the words of reconciliation and all those things. The way I see it, we have to be one. Even though we're totally separate in our identity as to who we are part of Canada. We have to be a part of you. You have to be a part of us. You are connected to us. So when we get into all those words and all those things, we have to forget about those words and really focus on what it means and not identify specific words to how we relate to one another, what our purpose is here. We're not here to be totally separate all the time as Indigenous people. That who I am as an Indigenous person is who I am. I'm connected. We always identify ourselves as to where we're from. And that is our connection to the land and the water, and that's our jurisdiction. That's who we are. We're a part of our ancestors. We're a part of you. So you are a part of us now, whether you want to be or not. I know a lot of people don't want to be. But we're here to look after one another. We're here to move in this world now as a unit, because without that ability to do that, we are going to have so much conflict and so much wasted time, energy, and dollars that we're doing more harm than any good. If we can always find this way, if you can respect me for who I am as an Indigenous person, where my ancestors lie from this country, my connection to the Algonquin people here is strong. I feel them here today. I feel them standing with me. That's how I am. I want to be a part of all of you in order to have survival for our future generations. To me, it's that serious that we need to be a unit, not with just Canada, but I know the other nations as well. And I know that's a huge challenge, but we got to start here. We have to have that ability of your respect and hear my voice and listen to it with meaning. I'm not here telling you what to do, how to do it. I'm here to help you.
Thank you very much for your wise words, and you've all given us a lot to consider. We will see your briefs. I know you've all expressed a concern about the speed of which this is moving along. We are under tremendous pressure to hear everyone's recommendations and consider those. The reason we are wanting to see that done in a speedy manner is because we all recognize that the legislation as it stands today is not meeting the needs of the country and that we need to change it. And it does take quite a while to get through the process and come out the other side as legislation that's approved by both houses. So what we want to do is hear from all of you as we have done, and we really appreciate the time you've taken to come and do that face-to-face. We will read your briefs. We will get them in time to be able to bring forward recommended changes. Thanks again, and miigwech.